Thank you all for coming tonight. It's nice. I sort of feel on a cold evening like this, it's sort of a good excuse to have a glass of wine and some cheese. And the best part, and sit close. You're definitely sitting close. If there's not enough seats, we can find some more seats so everyone can even sit closer. But the bit that I think is even more of a treat is to be able to have a lecture. One of those things that we've zoomed in and zoomed out the whole of lockdown, but actually to have someone standing in our podium and giving a lecture, that's fantastic. It's been such an exciting last few days. I think Carl's phrase that he emailed the other day is it's been a Kumalo Legae fetishism or festival of everything, but it certainly has, and I think we have lived all of it with enthusiasm because it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. So again, obviously we're here because of this amazing exhibition and amazing book that's been put together by Gavin and Charles, and I think most of you probably know both the authors, but obviously Gavin Watkins standing here and Charles Skinner sitting at the back of the room, but congratulations to both of you again on this monumentally magnificent book. It's becoming the amazing
Can I just make a note? I'm only the prop man tonight, so I'm here to do something for Miriam, not sure what. Hold your scarf.
I hope it's a bit more exciting than holding your scarf, but anyway.
Scarf.
Sorry, scarf. Anyway, for me it's such a privilege to introduce Miriam Grech-Cumbo. Obviously we all know her as Mims. I feel like Mims is part of our family. Not only does she have a million accolades of fabulous food, fabulous entertaining, fabulous warmth, fabulous enthusiasm, but very cool jewelry, the bit that I envy, which some of it seems to have been made by your dad. This one, and a few more pieces you wore this weekend. I think when you have the privilege of having an iconic father, it's often a responsibility of particularly daughters, I think, often to absorb the legacy and talk about the legacy. And I think I luckily had the privilege of meeting him, but I think he'd be exceedingly proud to have you standing here tonight with your family around you, and all of the art world and all of his sculptures and his work. So I think he's here in spirit. I think he's very proud of what you're going to do and say. But what a testament. And also, how lucky is he that his legacy is being relived through you, and your family, but you're saying it tonight. So I think congratulations. We're going to look forward to all that we haven't or heard or get the inside scoop from the inside, which I think is a treat. But I think here's, in absence of Egon, I think fabulous legacy to him and your mum and the rest of your family. But thank you for doing this, and what a privilege to have you speaking. Thank you.
The title of my talk tonight is Egon Guenther, An Eye for the Future. Good evening, my name is Miriam Grech-Cumbo and I'm the daughter of Egon Guenther. Sorry, is this working? I would like to thank Strauss and Company for inviting me to share the background on and the insights about my father. My hope this evening is to give you a picture of Egon as it relates to the artistic development of Sydney Kumalo and Ezrom Legae, and more broadly the growth of modernist art in the later half of the 20th century in South Africa. Egon was born in 1929 in Mannheim, Germany. Because his mother was Jewish, at the age of 18 he was put into a labor camp for 5 years near Sassbach in Baden, Germany. After the war, he was recruited by the Americans for the OSS, the Office of the Strategic Services, which was the first independent US intelligence agency. It later became the CIA, and his job was to trace people so that they could be brought to stand to trial for committing mass murder. At night, he did a course in bookkeeping and finished his diploma as a goldsmith with flying colours, because he didn't have time to do it before, you know. In 1947, he opened his first art gallery in Mannheim, exhibiting the so-called degenerate art. that had been confiscated by the Nazis during the Hitler years. And he exhibited at the famous, these were also exhibited at the infamous 1937 exhibition Enttartete Kunst, Degenerate Art. Simultaneously, he trained and worked as a goldsmith under his father's tutelage. As a gallerist, he represented Max Ernst, Willy Baumeister, Rudi Berbenz, Max Ackermann, that's Max Ackermann, Bernhard Schulze, which is here, Ernst Geithlinger, Rudolf Scharf, among others. Egon was later to introduce Scharf's lino-cut work to Cecil Scottness, who thereafter concentrated primarily on creating innovative, incised wooden panels and totems and woodblock printing. In 1946, Egon was influenced by the famous German art anthropologist, dealer, and collector Hans Himmelheber, who inspired him to appreciate and collect African art. This was to become his greatest passion, and it took a lifetime to establish an internationally renowned collection. In my pocket I have something which I'd like to show you. It's a little story which is not in this production. It's a little Benelulu figure, and my father was courting my mother, and he needed a packet of spaghetti, and he went to the grocer. This was collected by Hans Himmelheber in 1938. And this little Benelulu sculpture was swapped for one packet of spaghetti. And it's so sad. And years later, when he went back to Germany, he was walking down the road, and this grocer, Herr Klein, or whatever his name was, ran out and said, "Herr Guenther, I noticed you walking past my shop. Please tell me about your family. Come in and have a cup of coffee, and please let me run upstairs and give you something." And he came back downstairs, and in his hand, he opened his hand, and this was the little Benelulu figure he swapped for this packet of spaghetti, and it was back in our family. So that is why I brought it.
I'll give you 2 packets of spaghetti.
You won't get it, my friend. The original stimulus for Egon's interest in African art came from his father Nicholas's chalkware staff.
This is my job. Hold on.
That's your job. It's got 2 snuff compartments, which he acquired in the Belgian Congo prior to Egon's birth. As a boy, Egon was fascinated by this object, as well as by the colourful stories his father related to him about Africa in 1905. As a young man, my grandfather, Nicholas, boarded the freighter to South Africa to seek a fortune at the Kimberley diamond mines, and later went by Oxwagon to Johannesburg to see if he could find a job on the gold mines. Thereafter, he went to the Belgian Congo because he was actually French-speaking. He was away from Europe for 7 years. In 1950, Egon married my mother, Hannelore Schmidt, and they left Germany for South Africa to start a new life, far away as possible from the war-torn Europe and all its traumatic memories. My parents arrived in Johannesburg in 1951. Egon recounted, "I never left Germany, I came home to Africa." Egon initially opened a jewellery workshop, and later his first South African art gallery, Cornant Mansions, Bree Street, in Johannesburg. On his first exhibition, he showed his very avant-garde jewellery and his degenerate European art. everyone was welcome to attend these exhibitions, regardless of race, which was exceptional during the height of apartheid. Egon told me that the people who attended these exhibitions were utterly shocked and scandalized by his art. And you can imagine. And as they had never seen works like these that Egon exhibited. Egon felt that his role in life was to educate his clientele, introducing them to the modernist art and giving them a broader awareness of artistic movements and on the African continent and in Europe. Egon carried on collecting African art, mainly from West and Central Africa. He set about tracking down formal colonial officials and descendants and missionaries in pursuit of original art pieces, which they may have kept in their family. In 1964, he returned to Germany and contacted friends and clients who had brought the art pieces he had sold before coming to South Africa. However, they were not willing to sell them back to him. So he began purchasing pieces from other dealers and auction sales, mainly Sotheby's London. Egon was a born designer with a good eye for quality craftsmanship, and he had a vision beyond his time. Many clients that bought art from him asked him to hang it up in their homes. Egon would tell them that their furniture was not right. He didn't use those words, by the way. Nor were their carpets and the color of their walls. And so they would let him change all the things to complement their new artworks. On occasion, he also designed their furniture, and so he became an interior designer. Before the clients knew what was happening, he had changed the way they thought and saw things. And a classic example is the whole of Harry and Bernice Litz, Egon's neighbors. Works from Harry Litz's collection, which had been sourced from Egon, were sold by Strauss and Company in 2014. In 1963, a group of artists consisting of Sidney Kumalo, Eduardo Villa, Cecil Scotness, Giuseppe Cattaneo, and Cecilia Sash founded the Amadlozi Group. The title Amadlozi means spirit of our ancestors, and it derived from the spiritual figures known to the Nguni people. Egon influenced this group by introducing them to German Expressionism. He also represented many other artists other than those mentioned above, including Ezrom and Ben Arnold. This was in the height of apartheid era, but Egon was never afraid to stand up to authority and injustice, particularly as he saw it his job to nurture black artists who had nowhere else to go to get recognition for their art. Polly Street Art Centre was a great source of talented artists. Egon went there from time to time to scout for possible artists that he wanted to represent. I remember my father bringing the artists home for a meal, and then he would show them his art collection, and they would become inspired by what they saw. So, gallerist and mentor for Kumalo and Legae. In 1962, he held Sydney's first solo exhibition at Cornet Mansions. I have press clippings of this event, which state that his sculpture, Black Leopard, sold for the princely sum of 260 rand. Sydney was a lovely man, respectful, gentle, and loved by us children. He always shook our hands, and he wore lovely clothing, and he always had shiny shoes. You must remember I was about 4 years old or 6 years old when I remember all this stuff. In 1963, for facilitated by Egon and fellow art collector Vittorino Meneghelli. The artists of Egon Guenther Gallery were represented successfully at the Amaclausi exhibitions in Rome, Venice, Florence, and Milan, giving them international status. In 1965, Egon decided to move his gallery out of central Johannesburg, and he built a new gallery as an adjunct to our house. The gallery was designed by Donald Turgle, whose unique African Marrakesh building style attracted my father, as it was unlike anything in Johannesburg at that time. It featured whitewashed walls, lit alcoves for special pieces of art, courtyards and seating areas, and decorative brickwork in front of the windows. Best of all, in Egon's new gallery were the fantastic front doors with wooden panels incised by Cecil Scottness. In 1966, Egon held his first solo exhibition for Ezrom. Ezrom was an unbelievably gifted artist. His drawings were remarkable and powerful. His personality was totally the opposite of Sydney's. He wore colourful clothing, caftans, loose shirts, and he had long dreadlocks. He wore red velvet slippers. He would pick up my mum and he would kiss her on both cheeks and swing her round and round, and all of us would end up laughing. He was a spontaneous character. Chosen pieces were sent to Vignali Foundry in Pretoria for casting. When the casts were returned, my father had to hand finish each piece. This is what made his cast so special. Scraping out the residual plaster of Paris, filing and hand finishing the bronze sculpture, applying patina, buffing the pieces with special wax, and finally mounting the finished sculptures on a wooden base. My father frequently said, presentation is as important as the artwork itself, which is true. During the time that Egon represented Sydney and Ezrom, they brought many terracotta sculptures to the house. Egon had the good ones cast in bronze and stamped and numbered, and when they had a body of work ready for my father, he had them display the work in the courtyard in a line, because he was German. And he would walk up and down in a row, not saying anything. Then he would stand back and ask them to critique their own work. That's what he did with me with my school report. Sydney would shift around on his legs, looking uncomfortable, and scratch his head. Ezrom would stroke his goatee and tilt his head with a pained look on his face. And then they would look at my father and say, I see that some of the art is not good sculpture. Egon would make them take the rejected sculptures to the top of the steep driveway, and he would have Sydney and Ezrom hurl them down and smash them. Wow. I'm sorry I had to tell you this, but this is the truth. They had tears in their eyes, and even as a young child, because I was very young, I felt sorry for them. But my father explained that as a head of a leading gallery, it was his duty to keep the standard of the artworks higher than that of the other artists and galleries, for the sake of his good name and that of the artists represented by the Egon Guenther Gallery. Egon as a book printer. In 1972, Egon built a printing studio under our house. He bought a Fag, Fisher and Company proofing press and established himself as a master printer of superb hand-printed books, major graphic portfolios and graphic prints in limited small editions. His first book was Man's Gold. It took him and my mother 3.5 years to print, and I had to do all the cooking in that time. Cecil Scottness produced 28 wood blocks and 7 poems were written by Stephen Gray. In 1979, he printed The Hunter, written by Olive Schreiner. Wendy Vince executed 12 delicate metal engravings, which were used to produce the graphic prints in the book. Beautiful work, beautiful work. She told me that he was a taskmaster and she had never ever worked for him again. But the work was superb. The third and final book was The Roy Neck by Charles Bosman, which was completed in 1981. Cecil Scottness did 14 wood engravings, which were used to print the graphics in black and white for the book, and 1 colour woodcut for the first page. In the year 2000, Egon sold the bulk of his African art collection at Sotheby's, New York, as he felt that he was getting too old to take care of these pieces. In 2012, Egon did a series of monoprints with Kim Berman. They worked every Friday for 1 year and produced a series of lovely, colourful prints. Egon, the collector and man. Egon was a collector of many things and had many interests. He was an exceptional art photographer. He was a lover of good wine and food. He adored jazz and classical music. He collected books. He had a wonderful collection of cameras and microscopes. He enjoyed the company of his friends, his family and grandchildren. He was a generous man and loved telling naughty jokes. He would laugh at his own jokes even if they weren't funny. It's true. How to describe Egon? He was passionate, opinionated, visionary, generous, dynamic. His support of young artists, both black and white, during the apartheid era, unquestionably shaped the South Africans' artistic development. Egon passed away at the ripe old age of 94. I would like to thank Gavin Watkins, Charles Skinner, Kevin Shenton, Donnell van Jaarsveld, Liz Witter, Cynthia Kemp and Strauss and Company for producing this magnificent catalogue raisonné of sculpture of Sidney Kumalo and Ezrom Legae. I believe that this book is vital to South Africans' black art history and that it will keep these important artists' works alive, and it will be an indispensable resource for anyone who cares about Sidney Kumalo and Ezrom Legae and the evolution of black art in our country. And thank you also to my husband and RGC Engineering for the photogrammic, I can't read it, scans. Sorry about that.
Sorry, about that.
It's my speech. So, finally, I'd like to thank my father for leaving me his magnificent collection of German and African art, and for instilling me a love for the arts and a critical eye and a passion for sharing his legacy. I will leave you with some quotes from Egon, which were recorded in interviews that Gavin Watkins conducted with Egon in the early 2000s and available on the website kumalo-legae.org. Sorry. Thank you, Gav. He said, I never exploited my artists. I really did it for the love of art. I'm a servant of art, nameless. I'm a catalyst. And finally, one of Egon's favorite sayings in art, sayings is, in art there is no right or wrong, only good and bad. And now I have something to ask you. If anybody would like to say something funny about Egon, which is quite easy, I would like you to come up and say it. So I've got a whole list here, and some people are very shy. But those that, I know Saul wants to say something, and I'd like Saul to start. And maybe anybody that wants to say something about my daddy, I would really appreciate it. Saul, please.
Here's what I want to say. That Egon would have been enormously proud and so delighted by this exhibition. And to Gavin and Charles, he was just, his gratitude would be unbounded. And to Miriam too. And she's looking so gorgeous tonight. He would be so proud. I'm so happy with her. Egon was a man of many colors. He had a psychic intuition about art. He could see art, he could see sculpture, and he could see whether it was good or bad. You heard Miriam just now say there's good and bad art. Egon he could do that. I don't think Egon was a kind man. He was very demanding. When a fat man came to see him one day, I'm going to tell he said to this fat man, so when did you last see your cock? There's another story, I wasn't party to it, but I've been told about it. Egon had a very important international gentleman, I don't know in what field he was, but come to have dinner with him. And this man wanted a particular wine, and Egon had a wonderful wine collection. Egon had a palate that he could determine where the wine came from, whether it was America, South America, or whether it was Italy or France, and he could perhaps on a good day even tell you what part of the vineyard the wine came from.
And the winemaker.
Yeah, the winemaker's name even. Yeah.
He had a wonderful palate. And then these people, the gentleman and his crew came for dinner, and they wanted a particular wine. I think it was a Lafitte. I don't know why. That's not so good.
Latache.
A Latache wine. And Egon poured the wine, and this guy then poured Coke into the wine. So Egon got up and he says, this dinner's over. He said something else which I won't tell you. Egon was very, very forthright. But while perhaps he wasn't a kind man, because he had very high standards and demanded very high standards from everybody with whom he came in contact. But he was an extremely generous man. He was generous to the people that he worked with. He was generous to young artists. He wanted to engage with them. He wanted to promote them. He was only happy when artists were around him and he was promoting. And that was a wonderful trait. He was, on an occasion, we had a silver tea set. Didn't know where it came from. My partner had bought it at an auction somewhere, and we spoke to Egon about it and said, bring it along. So he brought it, he took one look at it, and he told us exactly where it came from, why it got into South Africa. We went off, I think, to dog training, and Egon polished it, and he fixed it. That was the kind of man he was. He leaves a wonderful heritage of the art in his family, in his children, in his daughter and his son-in-law, who really is emulating his wine palate, but he's not quite there yet.
You won't be invited to dinner.
So now I've just done myself in for the dinner party. But the heritage that he leaves is this wonderful family, this passion that they have, and the passion that they will instill on so many people. And of course, that wonderful, wonderful art collection. Really.
Please, Ronnie, come. Ronnie is my special.
Hi, just a few words. I'm a book person, book collector, and I was introduced to Egon many years ago through Peter Carstens, who downed his golf portfolio. And we struck up a friendship, and I'd just like to confirm the generosity that's been referred to. Miriam mentioned his other two books that he printed. The Hunter, in fact, exists because of me. I'm not taking any credit for the book, but he was looking for a topic to do, and I'm an Oliver Schreiner enthusiast and collector, and I suggested he do The Hunter, which is the allegory which appears in the middle of the story of an African farm. And I really think, as a book person, that those two books in particular, The Hunter and the Roinik, are the finest books that have ever been produced in this country. And I can also confirm the notion that Egon was an absolute. In the process of making those books, he would examine every piece of brass typeface. And if there was a tiny irregularity, he would discard it. He went as far as to hand roll the papers with which those books were bound with leather.
He used to cut them to the size with a bread knife.
Exactly. So I don't think anybody else who makes private press books has given as much attention to the minute detail in those books. And I think they're underrated, those books. They were done in small editions of about 100, I can't remember.
55.
Yeah, and the most wonderful books that have ever been produced in this country. Just as a testament to his perfectionism, we had many meals with him. And not only was he a perfectionist about books and art, but as the last speaker mentioned, his wine knowledge was astronomical, and it was almost like a theatre show, the few bottles of wine that he would open at each dinner and give us a dissertation on the wines. And not only the wines, but Hannah, his wife, was a wonderful cook, and he was very, very involved in the culinary arts as well. And so, as I say, the meals that we had with Egon were a performance, and he was wonderful. And another testament to his generosity is he gave Diane and I a wonderful Ezrom drawing, which is in the exhibition. The drawing of the not asked for, not requested, but he just gave it to us. As part of his generosity. So, yes, I have very fond memories of Egon, and I think you've done him your day justice.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful man.
Thank you very much. Yes, Carl. He's not like that.
I searched out Egon when I think I was in early high school, and came for the first visit. My parents I called Egon and asked him if I could come and visit and see his collection. And my parents brought me. And there are stories always about having to be exactly on time at the gate. Otherwise, he would not let you in. So I was always extremely nervous to get there exactly on time. And I remember losing our way once and being extremely nervous, but we always got in. And so I met Mims in those early years, and she had a transistor radio, and she was swinging around in the trees while I spent time.
And I had those cool Levi jeans.
So our worlds only really interconnected slightly later, and this teaching quality of Egon that everybody talks about was absolutely central to his life and his contribution to this country. I was a very young boy, and there was nowhere to see African art in this country. I was very interested in it, and I'd heard that he had a collection, which turned out to be the greatest private collection of classical African art in this country. And so he was extraordinarily nurturing. He would take me through the collection. He would talk me through each whole series of pieces each time. But the interesting thing is, after each visit, when I came back again, he wanted to know the names of the pieces and what I'd learned. So it was not just, you didn't just go along, you had responsibility to learn. And so it was an amazing teaching process over many years, both at looking at African art, but also seeing, of course, Kumalo and Legae's work. And his contribution to the power of art in the 60s is quite extraordinary. I think the biggest contribution or the biggest gift in anyone's life is to have somebody who has confidence in you. And Egon chose a small group of artists who he had absolute confidence in, and he worked very, very closely with them. As you hear from Mims, to tossing works and breaking works and, harsh words, but one really learned through that process. It wasn't mollycoddling. So if one sees the emergence of Cecil Scottness, one of the great artists of the 1960s and 70s, those early years with Egon are absolutely remarkable. Some great, great works to be produced in the country, and there are two small pieces on the next auction from that period. If one looks at Eduardo Villa, the enormous contribution that he made as a sculptor, and in the early years, the influence of Legae and Kumalo on him, and vice versa. Cecily Sash, who's almost been forgotten, but has an incisive quality of abstraction, which was unparalleled, and she made a huge contribution in teaching. She taught me at Wits University. And so did Pino Cattaneo, the other great Italian artist of great sensitivity. Most people don't know his work today. But if one looks at that group of artists, they are all very, very different. But he was able to nurture this intensity in each of them. And we see that quality in this body of work shown here at Strauss this evening, of a sustainedness and of a coherence in working from one work to the next. There's a huge shift when they leave Egon and go to first, of course, to Grosvenor Gallery, and then to Linda Gibbon. And you see the shift into really being influenced by international art and not really trusting who they were, but feeling that they needed to be fashionable. And the work changes dramatically. The same happens to Scottness to some degree. he becomes much more repetitive and not as self-asserting. And I mean, Villa just continues in the most extraordinary manner for the rest of his life, producing this extrapolation of sculpture almost unlike one sees anywhere in the world. And he would be much better known if he was seen internationally because of this extraordinary drive and his understanding of his African context, which came from Egon. And he's looking at the contemporary world of Africa, its use of the steels which came from the very earth here, and as we moved into the late 20th century, its kind of futuristic quality. And I think Egon enabled this. He created a foundation. So we see his influence, particularly in the 60s, and in many of us who have issued from that. So we thank Egon for that contribution and for the wonderful sustainedness that has come from the family members and the collection and the the home, which is still intact, the most beautiful piece of architecture, which deeply affected my own looking at architecture and the relationship of art to space. The first indigenous garden I ever saw in South Africa was Egon and Hunger's garden. So they were very decisive in the way that they engaged their new place in the world. And of course, I think to end off on, they actually brought Africa to Africa. That most South Africans didn't know they lived in Africa, and many still don't know they live in Africa. And Egon's collection of African art, exposed the artists of the time to this remarkable tradition of classical African art, which did change their mindset. And certainly for me, I needed to learn to understand African art because it is like another language. And I needed to understand that because I was living on this continent. And so it certainly changed me. Thank you.
Yeah. Go on.
So like Carl, I arrived late at 10:10 the first time I met Egon, and I was promptly reprimanded. I was lucky to get through the gate, and I was told, you don't arrive at 5 to 10, but you definitely don't arrive at 10:10. So this was way back when I bought my first Kumalo and been sent to Egon through Stephen Belts, and it's in the preface to the book. But Egon was, it's interesting when people say Egon was hard. He was just this incredibly precise human being. I don't think he ever thought he was hard. There was a way to do things, and that was the right way, and there was no other way. And if he didn't like you, it wasn't even that he disliked you, you just didn't matter. You didn't get on the radar. If he liked you, he would do anything to support you. So I was very fortunate to meet him, and the first day started at 10 and ended at 11 that night. And after that, he shared so much with me, and he was just so fascinating to work with. And go onto my website, kumalo-legae.org. There's 45 minutes culled from about 15 hours of interview with Egon. But you get a real sense of the man. Talking to him at one point, and we're sitting, we've had lunch and we've drunk wine and we've been speaking all morning about Kumalo-Legae. And then, Egon would start, and I'd say something about including, references to Egon or the Guenther gallery in the book. And then he would go for this, you're not going to include me in the book. This book is not about me. I'm a servant of art, I'm nameless. This is about Kumalo-Legae, and I try and protest and say, but Egon, we have to mention your gallery because your gallery represents the artist. And it's a lovely little bit to listen to because you get a real sense of the man. It was absolutely genuine. This wasn't about, him. It wasn't about even what he did. And he told me at one point, it's on the interview, that he won some sort of sculpture competition. He said, but I wasn't really ever an artist. I won the sculpture competition, but I was just a catalyst. I was the person who made it possible for others to succeed. So I was very fortunate to work closely with Egon from 1998 right through until his death. And the catalyst for the book was Egon again saying he would never share any with me in the beginning. He had all these wonderful German records, all the records of all the works he'd cast, all his invoices, who he'd sold them to, his exhibition catalogs, his photographs. But he would read it to me, so I had to record it because he wouldn't give it to me. So he'd have this card and he'd say, 1962, blah, 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 title, casting so much, measurement so much, and I couldn't write it down, so I had to record it. And then after about a year and a half, he relented and he said, I've got a deal for you. I'll give you all my records and my photographs and everything, but you've got to do a proper book on that. So go on the website. It's fascinating. There's a little bit of there's a 10 minutes of Eduardo Villa. It came from about 50 minutes, but I had to edit out all the swear words. So it came down to 10 minutes. And you get a real sense of Eduardo. There's a wonderful quote. The first time I go and meet Eduardo, and I've been sent by Egon, Egon didn't come with me. So I say, I've come from Egon. And I say something positive about Egon, and then he says, oh, he's a difficult man. I can't do the Italian accent. And I say, yeah, but very smart and very talented. He says, yeah, very smart and talented, but hard to digest at times. So there's a wonderful 10 minutes of Eduardo with very few swear words. And then there's a little bit of an interview with Linda, but she kept on getting up and making tea. So she was very hard to record because she would start with something important and then disappear and then come back 10 minutes later with a cup of tea. So there's a very little bit of that. But the 45 minutes of Egon where he talks about Kumalo's qualities, Legae's qualities, issues with what had happened with the Grosvenor Gallery. Buy the book, you can read all about it. It's a detective story. And his interactions with Linda and what happened when Egon and Ezrom decided to leave him for apparently greener pastures. That's all recorded in the book. But the interviews, I think, are really insightful. I didn't really know Miriam in the beginning because I'd come and visit Egon and we would get locked away for 12 hours talking about stuff and then going for Chinese lunch and going for Italian lunch and then I would leave. So he was an incredible teacher and I think as Coral says, he would always test to see whether you'd actually picked it up. And we would have the odd little argument and I'd say to him, no, that was cast number 2 of 10 and he would throw his hands in the air and go and get his records, and of course he'd be right because he was never wrong. So, he was an incredible perfectionist. He was incredibly nice if he liked you. He couldn't have done more for me. But if he didn't like you and you crossed him or he felt that you had crossed him, that was it. You weren't ever going to cross his threshold again because that was it. So what a wonderful man, what a wonderful privilege you've had. But I think read the book because it's an amazing story. Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Do you want to say something? Say it.
A few sentences. It seems really strange to not have Egon here because he was that bigger personality. Sorry, am I talking into the microphone properly?
Yes.
But he does have extraordinary heirs and they go on for more than one generation. So I was very lucky after joining Goodman Gallery in 1982 to be told one day by Linda, go into the front because there's somebody here who never comes here and I can't talk to him. And I was, what are you talking about? And she said, it's Egon Guenther. And he very seldom even speaks to me. So she took me through to introduce me and he said, Mrs. Goodman, And she said, well, you know, it's Givon, Egon. And he said, yes, Mrs. Goodman. And she left. And, he asked me a couple of questions about what I thought of some Legae and Kumalo sculptures. There was nothing by Eduardo on the particular group show. And after a little while, he said, stop. You know a couple of things, but you don't know enough to talk to me. I said, I understand that. I have read a lot about you. I've been once to your home, to the gallery, and we also were late. And he said, yes, I recall, so I never came to talk to you. But there is no 5 to or 5 past. There is only on the hour or the half hour. But we gradually became friendly, and I had the great honor of being told by him once, yes, well, Mrs. Goodman did some good things with the artists, but I don't like some of the sculpture. But it's interesting to hear you talk about them because you have some passion, and so for that, I forgive you for not working for me. Which was a wonderful line, but no less a person than Elizabeth Bradley, who I have to say I miss terribly. Elizabeth and the late John would have also been immensely proud to see this exhibition. And Elizabeth always conceded that the guide of her own taste was principally Egon, but when he wasn't around or disapproved of some of the newer works, then she would ask an opinion from Carl and from me. And that was really a great honor as well, because she did put together an extraordinary collection. But more than anything else, I wanted to say after 41 years with Goodman Gallery, what a pleasure it has been to come and see this exhibition on 3 occasions now. It is the most staggering exhibition of South African sculpture I have seen anywhere, and that includes some of the classical African art, which the Princeton University bought from your father's collection. And in fact, both the holdings of Princeton University's collection and the Zurich Kunsthalle are much the richer for the great eye for the future of African art that belonged to Egon Guenther. But more than that, what Strauss and company have done, and particularly what Gavin has sacrificed a quarter of a century of a life towards, is the most astonishing book I have ever purchased. And in just a few days since I was happy enough to acquire it, I feel enriched. So congratulations are due to both Gavin and Charles Skinner for his research work, but also to Wilhelm, who has made an astonishing exhibition out of this history. Please tell everybody you know they have to see this exhibition and support this book, which has been generously subsidized by Strauss to keep it even vaguely affordable. And very finally, Egon leaves a legacy with Miriam and Ari and their amazing collection and their amazing home and gallery, because it still is a gallery. And I said to you the other night, and I really meant it, your father would be immensely proud of the way you have curated his legacy. And you have always taken that responsibility, and you've done a bloody fine job. And then you have your daughter, who is a great gallerist too. So, Gina, it's been a privilege to work with you over the years. It's lovely to hear you talk about him tonight.
Thank you so much.
He was intimidating,
Yeah.
but he had a right to be.
Yes.
And that was his eye for the future. Thank you.
I want to say something. But friend, do you hear? What I have to say?
Good evening.
Hello, Luca.
I'm Luca. So we arrived in South Africa 10 years ago, in a few months, as a guest. So we made it our home very quickly. And I can say that our relationship with Miriam Aurelio and through them with Egon has made us feel more at home much quicker. So we do go quite often. We spend time with them. We enjoy the wines, which I still think some of it comes from Egon. And it's very, very good.
But
and
not
the
for
food.
much longer.
Well, and it's always been special. So he has spent some time. We had the privilege of knowing him in his last years. So I think we knew him for maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah.
He enjoyed speaking German with my wife because we came from Zurich. I was surprised to hear Zurich so late in the presentation tonight, because I know it's a very important center for African art. And I don't have something very funny to say, but I once took a picture in your garden.
Yes, yes.
And I think it was a Kumalo's
Yes, it is. Yes.
Piece of art, and I showed it to Egon and said, "No, this is not nice." It's okay. So it's good hearing the truth. I didn't think it was a perfect picture. I'm a good hobby photographer, but I just said, let me show them anyway. And it just came back, so it was the way it came. I was told the same thing by another member of the family once, but I will not go in there.
He was brutally,
yes, which is good. It's
truthful,
and there's nothing worse, I think. There's 2 things which I think are worse in life. One is people who don't carry respect, and false people.
Yeah.
And they usually belong together. So, and Egon for sure was neither one or the other. Thank you.
Sit down now. Sit down. Do you want to say something with these? Oh my God. This was my neighbor many years.
We became Egon's neighbor because there was an empty piece of ground next to Miriam and Ari's house. And he phoned Harry and he said, "You've got to buy this piece of ground." And when Egon said, "You've got to buy this piece of ground," he meant it.
So what you called him behind his back? The guru.
Oh, I was going to just talk about it. When Harry and I were dating, he said to me, "One day you'll meet my guru." And the guru happened to be Egon. And for at least 30 years of us being neighbors, Harry would go to Egon every Saturday afternoon, and they'd go through catalogues and art books, and he would teach Harry. And his knowledge was unbelievable. And one day I said to Harry, "But how can one person be so knowledgeable and know so much?" And I learned over the years that there was this one person who was an expert at everything. He actually designed our house completely and got a builder. We didn't have an architect. And it was on the edge of the mountain, so they had to put a reinforced wall. And they started off with the wall, and Egon, who supervised the whole building, came over and said, "This is no good." And he actually built trenches to hold this wall, and it was like a dam wall. And when we had flooding or water coming down the mountain, everybody else's houses had been damaged except ours. And we actually had an engineer in the house one day. He walked around and looked around, and he said, "But how come there are no cracks in this house?" And there was never, ever a crack. And that was Egon. And just a small little anecdotal incident, we had a banister upstairs going up the house, and I think he made the builders pull down that banister 8 times because it wasn't precise. And the only way he measured it was with his eye. He didn't have any tape measures or anything. He looked at it and he made, and I think in the end they were so happy to get rid of him. He used to come over every single day and check how the building was going. And there are lots of lovely stories about Egon. He had a special ring for the front door, so when that bell rang in a certain way, you knew Egon had come to visit.
And you had to run.
And you had to run.
But he learned how to build because he was during the war. He was in the camp, and he was a builder. They made him build, bunkers and things like that.
He actually told Harry that the foundations of the house were built like bunkers. And this is why there was no crack in the house.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think I just have to say something.
Yes.
So when Egon turned 90, for some reason he was going to reinvent himself and clean out his studio and start printing again. I'm never sure why he chose me, but he chose me to work with him. And so I had Fridays with Egon every Friday, and it was challenging for both of us because I think he had this idea of what he could teach me to do, which was something I couldn't do, which is work with color, but he had mixed the color, he had pinker, yellow, lime green, all the colors I never could tolerate. We would work with it, and I think some of our best times were laughing at what came out, tearing it up into little pieces so Mim could do collages. So the destroying of most of what we made was really fun. But I think just what was amazing, having those times with him and laughing a lot and finding lightness, listening to music, finding a kind of lightness, eating chocolate. And luckily he kept his cell phone in his pocket, because when I was going to be late, and that was quite often, I could phone him. I say, I'm 2 minutes away. So when he was down at the bottom of the drive pacing, and he didn't have his phone in his pocket, he knew I was on my way. But I think those moments and that year I had with your family, with Egon, was remarkable, because he did teach me so much about myself, about letting go. He didn't like the kind of work I did. He wanted me to really do something very, very different.
Out of your safety.
Out of my safety. But we'd really worked together, and he wouldn't allow us to touch his press.
No, that's so well.
We couldn't, like, you could press
Still
the
today, I'm
button.
scared to touch
So
it.
Mim calls me, and it was like, don't touch the press. But it was a very remarkable period of my life, and I just
And the
very
very beautiful
thankful.
work you did. I know. Really, is there anybody else that wants to talk? Otherwise it's done. Okay, thank you very much, Egon.